Leafs Converse TLC OGs, how are you? It's NJ. This is the Leafs Convo podcast. Not much from me for this episode of the Leafs Convo. We're going to hand it over to Mike in Buffalo, who has a special interview with a good friend of his, Bill in Florida. Yes, it's Mike Augello plus the one and only Bill Waters right now on the Leafs Convo. Enjoy. We are pleased to be joined by the former assistant general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Mr. Bill Waters. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Michael.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're being buried in Western New York, as it is usually the case in late January, and our friends in Toronto are getting the same. I believe you're down in sunny and fairly warm Florida?
I would say relatively warm, yeah, and with no snow, it makes it just a little warmer. But Florida's been cool for a couple of weeks, and that's not a complaint. That's just a statement of fact. It's still a wonderful place to spend January in spite of it getting cool at times. But it didn't turn cool till about the middle of the month. So we'll get over it and we'll get on with the winter/summer/Florida. Yeah.
Now, the Maple Leafs are coming out of the All-Star break, the rather lengthy All-Star break, and Kyle Dubas picked this time, I think it's 9-day gap between the last game and their next one in Detroit on Friday, to make the deal that I've been basically talking about the last 2 to 3 years, which is to get a top four defenseman. And they gave up their 2019 first-round pick, a good prospect in Carl Grundstrom, and a 2018 second-round pick in Sean Durzi to acquire Jake Muzzin from the Los Angeles Kings. What did you think of this deal, Bill?
Well, as you know, I do the post-game, pre-game show with TSN 1050 on their share of the Leafs schedule, and I have been a proponent of the same formula that you have espoused as to whether or not they would be good enough to win the first round of the playoffs. And I think by acquiring Muzzin, they put themselves in a position where they're more likely to win the first round for the first time in 3 years than they were before they got him. And in an ideal scenario, the only difference that would have made it better for the Leafs had Muzzin been more aggressively physical, but I don't think he falls too short in that. I don't think you can ask for the world every time you try to make an acquisition. I think it's a great trade for the Leafs. It was timely on Dubas's part, and a first and 2 seconds is a chance that you take when you get a player who played on the Canadian World Cup team, which is a very prestigious appointment. I don't care who you are or how much you play. If you make that team and are asked to play for it, you've climbed the hockey ladder. And I think Muzzin fits in there. The fact that the coach who chose him for Canada's team in the World Cup is his head coach now is going to be nothing but beneficial, because Babcock would not be taking players who are going to let him down, whether they are becoming Leafs or are coming to Team Canada to play in the World Cup. This guy he trusts, this guy he can play a lot, and this guy will play a lot. I think Muzzin will fit right in on the first pairing, and it will give the Leafs a much better chance of competing for a victory, whether they play Montreal, Boston, Tampa Bay, or all three. They're going to have to get by a pretty good hockey team to be first-round victorious.
Ironically, this deal and this particular player, it sort of satisfies both ends of the sort of hockey spectrum. Muzzin is an analytics darling. He's very good on puck possession. But he also satisfies the people who I think rely more on watching the game and seeing the type of player that he is. He's not an instigator or an enforcer, but he is someone who does not shy away from the physical aspect. That's something that I think the Leafs defense has been completely short of. And as we mentioned before we started recording, he played 3.5 seasons for Sault Ste. Marie in the OHL, and Kyle Dubas was a member of that organization at that time. So it's sort of a good marriage of like everybody is satisfied with this guy. I think the only reservation that seems to be out there is that he's not a right-hand shot, and the speculation is they're going to put him with Morgan Riley, and that somebody like Dave Poulin on TSN this morning said they may move Riley to the right side and have Muzzin and Riley as the top pairing. What do you think of that?
Oh, I think that whatever they do with Muzzin and Riley is coincidental as far as I'm concerned. I think you're dealing with a player who can move the puck. He obviously has that kind of skating ability. He can shoot the puck hard from the point. That puts him second or third on the Leaf defense already. And I just think that his addition with his combination of strengths, not including analytical, but all the rest, make him a player who can help his team to win. And I think that's the most important type of acquisition that Dubas can make. And obviously, that's his criteria. Can I get a player who can help us win the first round? And then we'll take care of round two. So I think that on balance, Mike, if you're a fan or if you're a critic or if you're a cynic, you have to be happy with the acquisition of Jake Muzzin. He's 6'3", 215, 220, who knows? He can move the puck. That means he can skate with the puck. He can shoot the puck. That means he's unique on the Leaf defense. And he can separate player from puck in the corner with his size. I don't think he's a dynamo physically, but he can use his size and his strength to at least disrupt the cycle. There's not one single defenseman on the Leafs that can do that. And a team that cycles will kill them. At least Muzzin has done that in L.A., and he'll do it again in Toronto. The Maple Leafs have strengthened their team significantly, and they paid a fair price. The price will be related to whether or not they re-sign him, and they may or may not want to. But if they do and can, that will make the deal make a lot more sense. But when you look at the Leaf team and the types of players that they have on the team, they've got lots of the two that they got rid of.
Yeah, the first round pick will be in the 20s, so that I don't think they're concerned about that, since I think their organization, Dubas and Lou Lamoriello before him have done a pretty good job at building up the organization. Durzi was an overager as a second round pick. He's having a good year, split between I think Guelph and Owen Sound, so he may be an NHL prospect, but that's probably a few years down the line. Grundstrom is a very good prospect, and I think will be an NHL forward by next season. But a lot of people have said he's probably limited to being a top 9 or third line guy. But the third line guys are valuable. What I think that and I'm not going to toot Kyle Dubas's horn here, but what I think he accomplished, one, he made the deal coming out of the All-Star break before the prices escalate, and being an assistant general manager in the NHL, that the prices will go up. The price of poker goes up closer to the deadline. And he didn't give anybody up off of the NHL roster, and I think both of those things are really key.
Nor did he give up any of what is considered to be his top 3 prospects ready to play pro that are with the Marlies now, and that's a consideration as well. Grundstrom's a guy that people who I have talked to about him say that he reminds them of a young Patrick Hornquist, which is a nice comparison, and if he is that, so be it. But that's quite a stretch, and I hope for Carl's sake that he is, and he'll have a wonderful career in the NHL. And if those kids are ready to play, give them a chance, because the Leafs are stocked with younger players that are going to take up the top 9 positions on that team for a while.
Now, I personally, and I want to get your opinion on this, I personally believe that the Leafs are not done making acquisitions. They still have over $4 million in cap space remaining, and that's for this year, so that may aim Dubas toward making acquisitions of the rental variety. But they also have the $5 million of Nathan Horton's contract that they haven't put on long-term injury. So they really have upwards of $9 million in terms of adding salary. So Bill, I think that they still need another depth defenseman. I think they need a fourth-line center to take Freddie Gauthier out of the lineup because I don't think he is ready for prime time when it comes to the playoffs. Where do you think Dubas needs to address before February 25th?
Well, I go back to the Nashville Predator game of a few weeks ago when Austin Watson almost blew Andreas Johnson apart. Hit him so hard, he shook the building. There wasn't a single Leaf within 15 miles of that building who raised a finger in defense of Johnson and remind Watson that you're not going to push people around on this team. That is my answer. If he doesn't get someone in his group of 12 forwards or one of the defensemen that can do that, they're going to get pushed around and pushed hard because you're not going to try and skate with the Leafs come playoff time. You're going to play them mano-mano and see if you can wear them down. And they may do things that they're not going to approve of, and you have to have some way of expressing your anger and your disappointment in not playing the game fair. And that's what they don't have. I would like to see them get a guy like Fernell, but I gather the price is too high, and so you forget about that. If you could ever combine a winger who can play the game and who can represent what I just described, and I'm not talking about the town thug. I'm just talking about the guy that shows up and says, hey, you're going to do that to Andreas Johnson. You're going to do it to me first. Yeah. There's nobody there, and that's going to kill the Leafs. They don't get it. The problem is, Bill, that a guy like Ferland or a guy like Wayne Simmons, who are the two most mentioned power forwards available for the deadline, it's probably going to cost at least a first-round pick and probably a top prospect on top of that because the bidding war for those guys is going to be, not ridiculous, but, Carolina and Philadelphia are going to play it up for as much as they can. And I think the Leafs needed to use their assets to get the defenseman, which they did. Now, I think more than likely they're not going to be able to get that kind of physical force that's going to play in the top nine unless somebody pops on the market that we don't know about. It's I go back to two guys, and I'll see what you think of this. Two guys who have been Leafs before, who I think will be available and I think will be relatively cheap. And one is Brian Boyle, who's having a good year with New Jersey, and he could step in on the fourth line, and with a guy like Trevor Moore and Tyler Ennis, I think you have an effective fourth line there. And on the blue line, after the Jamie Alexiak deal between Pittsburgh and Dallas, Roman Polak might be a spare part in Dallas. And we know that Babcock likes him, and I don't think it would cost very much. So we're talking about those type of guys. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't think that they
you don't want to get into the big market. I'd take Roman Polak in a New York second. Brian Boyle doesn't do enough for me as a player that can come and defend his teammates. Brian's too nice a guy. You got to have a bit of a snarl in you, but it's not a bad idea. If they trade Brian Boyle, I got some swampland down here for you, Mike, in Florida. I'd like you to take a look at. I don't think that they'll get rid of Brian Boyle. He's had a banner year. He's a very important part of their team. So your ideas are better than mine. Ferland, I know is going to be. I know what I would have done. I'd have found a way to put Ferland and Hamilton in a package from Carolina for Nylander. Somehow get this team back on square and let Nylander go where he wants. That's his ace in the hole. He's already told people he wouldn't trade him, so maybe it shouldn't even be brought up. But if he wanted to get a player who he could keep for a couple of years and he wanted to make it tantalizing for the other team, give him time to sign the player in Ferland's case, and a two for one might be too much. You might have to throw something else in. But I'd find a way of getting rid of Nylander as quickly as I could.
There have been a number of people who've said, "Oh, they're not going to trade Nylander because Nylander said that Dubas promised him." I was at the media scrum the day that Nylander was signed. That's what Nylander said about Dubas. What Dubas said about Nylander and his media availability did not close the door on them trading Nylander. He basically said, we'll do our level best to not have to move him. But he didn't close the door. So I don't think that he doesn't have a no-move, no-trade clause coming off of the entry-level deal. He's only now starting to play decent after that last game against Washington. He's going to finish out the year. I don't think any team is going to be able to fit a $10 million cap hit. But once they pay that bonus in July, the $8.3 million bonus, he's a $700,000 base salary. And if they need help on defense or they need to clear salary to sign Marner or Matthews, I think Nylander's gone, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a very healthy market price, and I don't know William Nylander. I know of his father. I know his agent, so I know 2/3 of the group that really took Toronto to town on this deal. I just felt that when you bring a player from Sweden who you consider to be one of your best, and he shows up and is not fit to play, he's not in hockey shape to play, let alone in his fitness testing, and he had no regard for his teammates or himself or his coach. He shows up and does what he's done here for the last 2 months. I don't want him to be any part of my attempt to build a team with character, because he has none. Now, that's just my opinion, and if I'm being too harsh on him, I apologize, but I wouldn't have him around the place. I'd have found a way to get rid of him, and maybe that's what he's doing. I don't know, but that whole team was distorted when Babcock put him in the starting lineup the first night he was there. How about the players that got bumped? How about the friends of those players that got bumped? They said to each other, "What's Babcock doing? This guy can't play. He's not ready to play. Why didn't he have to try out for the team like we did?" That was the end of it. That was the end of Babcock. He has to reestablish himself with the team from a standpoint. He went overboard on Nylander, and only Mike knows why.
And he's been very public in his defense of Nylander since he signed. Just one thing, going back to something, and then we'll wrap it up here. Your point about the physicality and the pushback on this team, I've been talking about it as well for most of the season. And in the Washington game, everybody was sort of beating their chest when John Tavares knocked down Tom Wilson near the Leafs crease. And it was great, but the problem is you don't want your star players having to be the guys that stick up for other players. I mean, right now the only aggressiveness on this team is Nazem Kadri and guys who will step up, and they're not physical players, but Patrick Marleau and John Tavares. You need players that can say you're not going to push people around, and that's where I think Dubas is going to go before the deadline. Is get a couple of those guys.
Oh, that's the type of player he needs. What we're differing on is how deeply he's going to go for it. If he's going to go for just one of those fringe players that can play the game, third or fourth line, and can do what he has to do to make sure that the Leafs have one iota of respect, that's what he has to get. It may not appear to be much, but on the Leaf team it's a lot because there's none of it there. And you can't win without that. I'm not talking about picking fights. I'm not talking about fighting at center ice. I'm talking about going to the guy that just knocked your best player into the glass and almost concussed him. Look at Auston Matthews. He is not ready to play yet. From the Detroit game when the defenseman, whose name eludes me temporarily, cracked him into the wall. He came off the wall, and everybody in the building had their heart in their mouth. He has not played a lick since. He can't compete. And the people will tell you that his parking spot was between the dots in front of the net. He's not there anymore. He's back about 10 feet. And he hasn't played a solid game since that incident. And Kronwall was the defenseman, and he's the guy that hit him, and Kronwall hits you hard. I don't know what's bothering him, but Auston Matthews is not the player that he was the night before when you were in Buffalo watching the Leafs play, and he scored the tire, and he scored the winner, and he dominated that game. He was the best player in the league at that time. He is not even remotely close to it now. And if the Leafs are going to go anywhere, they've got to get Auston Matthews back to the compete level, back to the comfort zone between the dots, and play the game the way he plays better than any 20-year-old in the game.
Yeah, there's been a tentative nature to his game ever since that hit. There's no doubt about that. And one thing, just watching the Winnipeg-Boston game last night, Winnipeg is a big, tough team, a lot of size, and Boston, stood up to them. And that's the thing. That's what Boston will do against the Leafs. Guys like Marchand and guys like Backes will try to run Leaf forwards through the boards. And that they need somebody to push back against that and try to run Pasternak or Bergeron through the board. So I mean that's going to be, I think, something that Dubas has to address before the deadline. One last question.
Absolutely, or don't allow the propaganda to be printed and put on color print, saying the Leafs have a shot at the Stanley Cup. The Leafs have a 50-50 chance now, in my humble estimation, with winning the first round if they can get a player that we just talked about for the past 5 minutes.
Last question. There has been a significant amount of talk since Kyle Dubas' press conference before the All-Star break about the extension of Auston Matthews. There seems to be some optimism that they can get him locked up on a deal before the deadline. I think they want some cost certainty going into the summer and not have to deal with both Matthews and Marner as RFAs. The speculation from guys like Elliot Friedman and Pierre LeBrun has been that the contract would be probably 6 years, but less than Connor McDavid's $12.5 million. I know a lot of people are concerned because everybody wants them to get 8-year deals on these players, but I think 6 years makes a lot of sense for the Leafs because Tavares' contract is up in 6 years. If they sign Marner and Matthews to 6-year deals, then basically at 34 years old, they probably say goodbye to John Tavares and split the money between Matthews and Marner. I mean, do you have a problem with the Leafs negotiating shorter than 8-year max deals on Marner and Matthews?
Not a problem at all. I think it's by accident. It's been forced onto the marketplace, and it's the greatest thing that ever happened to the market because once the new CBA is done, it'll be down to 5 years. Why have yourself in the 3-year situation with a 28-year-old who is now on the other side of the mountain? The mountain's not that steep yet. But the 8-year deal, it puts you in a precarious position of overpaying to the extreme. I think the shorter the term, the better. And whatever happened to entry-level contracts going from 2 years, then we'll give you 3 or 4 to buy a year of your free agency, to the 8-year monstrosities that have been, that's why general managers lose the job of controlling the finances. They just, and one of the most difficult things in hockey, whether you be a manager or a coach, is to say no to a player. No, I'm not paying you that much. I can't pay you that much. Rick Kehoe, says Jim Gregory, I don't have room for you at that price. I'm trading you. He's gone to Pittsburgh and he scores 50 or 60 goals for 4 or 5 years. So what? The integrity of keeping your salary cap or your salaries at a level that is comfortable for competition and ownership in the league is far more important than not being able to say no to a guy who wants more than he deserves. And I'm happy to hear that. And to answer your question, a 6-year deal is more than enough, and it allows them to pay him less than McDavid. Otherwise, he would have been on an 8-year deal for probably $13 million. And guess what? He's hurt now. Can you imagine what's going to happen to him as he goes along if he doesn't adjust his way of playing and his way of thinking about the game to be competitive? I mean, I'm not disappointed in a 21-year-old who has adjustments to make. But I am disappointed in a 21-year-old who stopped competing. And he's taken 2 months off. If he's hurt, get him the hell off the ice. That's not his decision. That's the management and the coaches. You're not doing Auston Matthews any favors by having him play under the conditions that he's put himself in now. If he's playing with an injury, find out what it is. And I'm definitely afraid that it's the other shoulder. He's already done the one shoulder. Signing him to a long-term deal is a very, very risky position, and I don't know how else they can do it without admitting that he's not ready to play. We got to put him on the grill for 3 or 4 months to get him ready. I don't think it'd be that long. I just don't understand why the best 20-year-old in hockey has gone down at least 20 players on the list. He just can't play the way he played when he impressed everyone in the NHL with his play and his abilities.
And Mitch Marner's agent, Darren Ferris, probably can rightly make a case that, why Marner shouldn't be paid as much as Matthews, because he's been the more consistent and, has been probably their best player along with Tavares this year. But we both know that centers get paid more than wingers. And if they sign Matthews for $12 million, I think Marner will get 10, but I don't think he'll get much more than that. What do you think?
Well, I think that's what they wanted in the first place, and people laughed when they suggested it. But you watch the games like I do, Mike. You go to more live games than I have recently because I'm not in a position to do that. But the best Leaf on the ice has been Marner. The only Leaf forward that can carry the puck from one end to the other. The only Leaf forward that makes a living off of takeaways. The most creative Leaf forward on the ice. Those 3 items, I say to you, if he is the number one guy in each of those categories, why is he not better than Auston Matthews? And you don't have an answer other than what you and I just discussed. They pay centermen more than they play wingers. The best player on the Leafs by a country mile, including Tavares and all the others, is Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner is a 200-foot player. John Tavares is a 20-foot player. John Tavares has done everything that they expected of him and has been a good addition to this team. But he's not the best player on the team by a country mile. The country mile is Mitch Marner.
This has been great, Bill. Really appreciate it, and we'll try to get you on before the deadline, just before the deadline to see, maybe review what the Leafs have done in terms of other trades or get your feelings on, what they may do, and then, or after it to sort of do a review. But thank you very much for giving us your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mike, and it's always fun talking to you, talking about the Leafs. And the one thing you don't want misconstrued is I think Kyle Dubas is doing a hell of a job.
So intriguing, informative, in-depth, incredible. Thank you so much, Mr. Waters, for spending time with us on the Leafs Convo podcast. You, my friend, enjoy Florida. We'll see you back in these parts just in time for the beginning of a lengthy Maple Leafs playoff run. I believe it. Mike Augello, well done, sir. Follow Mike at Mike in Buffalo on Twitter, or you can get at him inside the comments section. Don't forget the next collab between MIB and NJ. Hours away. Thanks for listening, folks. The Leafs Convo is out.